And it's time for yet another episode of James Cameron 101. Welcome back, everybody. I'm your host, Eddie Green. Today is a very special episode. We are going to be reuniting myself and you, the listening / viewing audience, with Mr. Van Ling, who, if you're familiar with the episode so far, he first appeared on the Titanic Roundtable. And after that, he offered up a really nice suggestion, very good criticism of how to sort of focus on going forward, and I took it, and so we're running with it. Today is literally just Van and I, and we're going to be discussing, celebrating this beautiful film right here, The Abyss. This is going to be one of many episodes dedicated to The Abyss, and we're going to jump right into it. So without further ado, we have not said hello to each other yet. I wanted to make sure it was as authentic as possible. Here he is. Van, it's good to see you again.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you again, Eddie.
So first, let's talk about how you came to the suggestion of kind of zeroing in on, kind of doing these one-on-ones versus the like the round table. You wanted to kind of, because I think I invited you on the T2 3D roundtable or one of those, and you were like, I'd rather kind of, wait and just specifically talk about it with you.
Well, I think it's important when we're doing kind of these kind of historical kind of deep dives that we make sure that for as a viewer as well as for a potential speaker to make sure that um, everybody really gets a chance to go over things. And while I love roundtables, you know, because you get a lot of different people being able to talk. But what it means is that if they're not from the same departments and they're not from the same thing, and we have the same problem in the Academy and Visual Effects Society and other things where we get a diverse group of folks, and then the questions really only apply to one person at a time. And when I did the Titanic roundtable with so many wonderful people, I felt really bad that it's easy to kind of fall into the details of any one area and kind of give less time to everybody because obviously these things can't go on for a day.
Right.
So I just wanted to make sure that as a as a format that you keep in mind that sometimes one-on-ones can be more in depth. It all depends on the speaker that you're speaking with and the potential guests you have in terms of how involved they were in a project and how much of what their involvement was you might want to go over.
Right. Right.
And so those were my notes. They weren't criticisms per se. They were just notes on how to potentially kind of get the most stories that you're looking for and the most information
Right.
without having many people kind of being able to say one piece and then and although we all enjoy listening to each other, and for a lot of us we haven't seen each other for decades and decades, so it's really quite interesting. And one of the great things about doing these too is that you reconnect with a lot of folks that you haven't talked to in so long, and it's a great thing, and it's a wonderful thing you're doing here, Eddie.
Before we get into this, I have it pulled up here. I don't have the audio turned on just so that copyright and all that stuff is avoided, but just viewing it, I think is going to be totally fine. I wanted
Mhm.
to start things off by looking at, because this is how, out of all of Cameron's films, I would say The Abyss, up until last December when he re-released it in theaters in 4K, it was the one that I was the most unfamiliar with when it came to his, real body of work. I've never seen Piranha, and so I'm really discounting Piranha right now. I'm really focusing on Terminator Forward. Um, although
Technically it's Piranha 2: The Spawning,
I to the
which was
spawning,
the completely unrelated sequel to the original Joe Dante Piranha.
right? Yes, yes. I do plan on covering it. I like having some coverage here on the podcast because, for better or for worse, it is still a part of his story. So, but going from Terminator forward, The Abyss was always that one that was very it just escaped me for some reason. I had never seen it fully all the way through. This past December when it was re-released in theaters, went out to the theater, checked it out. So we're going to take a peek at the trailer that was released for it, and you can offer up commentary or anything. Seeing the images, if you want me to pause it, let me know. But I feel like that would be a good jumping off point, and then we'll get into some really cool, interesting talk about the Abyss. So here is the trailer. I'll play it here. And if you want to offer up anything or tell me to pause, let me know.
Well, I think that the interesting thing for the re-release, which I was so glad to see, come out, because it is really kind of an underrated film. It, didn't do great in the box office because it was so different than what everybody was expecting.
Right.
And you can see that immediately when, if you know the kind of context in which it was released. It was the third underwater film, but first announced kind of underwater theatrical film that was taking place in the year around 1989 or so. And that was because when people found out that the guy who did Terminator and Aliens was going to do an underwater adventure, they immediately started thinking, how do we get in on this interest that's going to be there because of Jim and his film? Even though they didn't know what it was going to be about, they just knew it was underwater because his last films were action and kind of horror. They figured it was going to be that. And so two different other productions happened because of the interest in Jim doing this unknown film called The Abyss, and that sounds very ominous, and it's underwater, and amazing discoveries. They meet something underwater that nobody's ever seen before. So two films were immediately rushed into production. One was Leviathan, that was ended up directed by George Cosmatos, who had done Rambo 2, Rambo First Blood Part 2, which Jim had co-wrote. So there was a lot of people trying to kind of log on to, his kind of, ride his tail to some extent.
Right.
And the other film was called Deep Star 6, which was also a kind of a straight underwater horror film. Underwater habitats with, creatures and strange activities and action. And interestingly enough, that film was written by one of Jim's best friends, Louis Abernathy, who I believe plays the character Bodine in Titanic.
Okay. All right.
One of the guys, the guy who was giving the showing off the computer graphic simulation of how the Titanic sank in the opening part of Titanic.
Yep.
And I had worked on doing the composites of Digital Domain's CG animation of the Titanic in those scenes, so it's kind of funny. But Lewis he's a great guy, great friend of Jim's, and as I recall, what he did when he had written Deep Star 6, he was asked, I don't know if he wrote it directly or he was asked to write it, and because he was a friend of Jim's, Jim said, hey, listen, I know everybody's trying to kind of get in on this, and I'll tell you what, I'll offer you X amount to buy your script to take it off the market so that there's no kind of confusion or interference. And Lewis, being kind of savvy, basically said, he went out and basically said, oh, Jim Cameron's offering me X amount to buy the script. And so they immediately, the people who actually made the film, bought it for a higher price. So,
wow.
Because they figured that, if Jim's trying to take it off the market, it must be too close to what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't the case at all, of course. That was a straight up, Deep Star 6 was a straight up kind of horror movie. And Jim knew it wasn't anything like it. And what he in fact did was he ended up helping his friend sell script. So there's, and of course there was no hard feelings at all for Lewis turning around. Jim thought it was funny that he turned around and sold it for a higher price because of it. And of course they've continued to be best friends, and obviously him being in Titanic and working on a lot of things with him. So yeah, that's the movie business.
I'll tell you. Well, I mean, that's the thing that you see happen time and time again, where it's probably one of the more prolific ones is Deep Impact and Armageddon in the same year. So it's like, it seems like every once in a while this happens where movies about the same thing just happen to release in the same year. Um, but it sounds like this particular case, because I am familiar with Leviathan. Is that's how you say
Hmm.
it? That
Peter
one I
Weller.
am that
Yeah.
that one I'm familiar with. So it sounds like there's a bit of a, okay, so they know this one's happening. Let's, like you say, rush this one into production as well
Yeah,
to
that
kind of.
sometimes happens. That happens with, large films spawn smaller films that are trying to ride their coattails. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because the idea is that if the big blockbuster gets all the attention, does really well, it makes people want to see other films perhaps that have the same kind of theme or genre. And then there are all these folks waiting to fill that void. And it kind of doesn't matter whether the film's any good or not.
Mhm.
They're
Right.
just fulfilling oh, underwater action. Let's see that. So it was kind of interesting. Leviathan, all the makeup effects work was done by Stan Winston.
Oh, wow.
So you have this kind of this incestuous everybody knows everybody else. And one of our key designers who designed the NTIs for the Abyss, as well as worked on a lot of other parts of the design aspect, was a wonderful artist named Steve Berg, and he also worked on Leviathan. So there's there's a lot of this kind of these connections. You can play 6 degrees of separation through
Right.
all of these things. It's really fascinating.
Right. So, having watched that trailer, was that, when was the last time you've seen footage from The Abyss, would you say? When was the last
Well,
time?
I saw it at a screening last fall when they ran it at the theater, the Westwood Theater
Okay.
here in Los Angeles, and Jim was there, and talked, did a little talk afterwards, and it was really great to see it with an audience, because I remember seeing it back in the day with audiences, and remembering certain things and certain reactions and stuff. And now, this many years later, 40, almost 40 years later, you get a different, whole new set of reactions that aren't affected by the other reactions from back in the day. These are all new people who weren't even born sometimes in that period. So it's really great to see, because what that does is it allows a film to be re-examined. And if the only thing you had heard about the Abyss was, oh, it came out, it came and went, it didn't do very well, and then you come into it without the kind of expectations that everybody back then said, oh, it's a Jim Cameron movie, it's going to be action, it's going to be aliens, it's going to be all the suspense. And I think some of them were confused by the amount of emotional, personal, interpersonal storytelling, although that is completely on brand for Jim. I mean, the way he creates his characters and the way he creates his relationships in those films have always been there. He just
Right.
kind of took something, a little deeper, pardon the expression, for the Abyss. It's a story about a failed marriage that kind of uh, gets resurrected, as do as do all the characters.
And it's
So
also, I mean, I had no clue because I was familiar with that storyline. I had no clue that by the time the movie, wraps up and the end credits are rolling, that it was basically a cautionary tale, to some degree, in the vein of The Day the Earth Stood Still. That's immediately what I thought of when I saw the film in December. I was like, "Oh, this is Cameron's version of The Day the Earth Stood Still," basically.
yeah, I joked with him it was Plan 9 from outer space. Human beings are stupid, 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 stupid. But I think that there's that message obviously needs to be reiterated every so often, especially nowadays.
Yeah.
And the fact that people are seeing it with its original full story and full ending is great. We had in those days this whole, you can't go over 2 hours, you shouldn't go over 2 hours. If you're David Lean, you can go to 220, and that's about it. Nobody wants to sit in the theaters that long. Um, you're watching an underwater movie, so there's a lot of water noises. You're all going to want to go to the bathroom. Something I've noticed is actually true as I get older. But the that whole thing was obviously a big challenge because his story was so big and his characters were, he doesn't want to short shrift his characters. So he's not going to like cut it out and keep all the action, which is what a lot of, notes that came in, I think, from some executives and things would say. And so he really wanted to keep as much as possible, and they finally negotiated to like 220 or something like that, and managed to keep it at that. But he had to kind of cut out the entire, in essence, he finished the emotional story, but he didn't finish the overall world issue story.
Right.
But he now is able to do that with the special edition, getting it out to people. That was the most important thing. We actually had done it only a couple of years after the original film came out. I was actually, when I was at Lightstorm, had worked all the way through The Abyss, starting with being his researcher, fresh out of school, and then went through all the way through production, post-production, visual effects, learned so much from that process, including how screwed up studio parameters end up being, not because they're all jerks, but because they're trying to figure out how to run a business while still honoring the artistic aspect of it. And so in 1991-92, after we finished Terminator 2, which gave Jim a lot more clout, obviously, as well, we said, hey, why don't we finish The Abyss the way we wanted to finish it? And so we did the Abyss special edition, and that was a lot of fun, and it was a challenge because we had to bring back actors to loop dialogue because all the original sound roles had been, let's say, misplaced forever by the studio. I think they left all the boxes of the original mag audio on a loading dock, and it probably got thrown away because people thought, oh, well, it's sitting on the loading dock. It's probably not, it's probably being put out there to be thrown away. So we had to go back to video tap tapes to get some of the audio and bring in the actors to do other audio. And the good news for that was that it was a great reunion, and it also gave us the ability to do interviews, to do Under Pressure, which the great Ed Marsh did. And Ed was also the guy who cut the what we call the Mankind's greatest hits montage that's in the end sequence, where it just shows all this war and the concentration camps and Vietnam and all the things that kind of are the searing indictment of humanity and why they deserve to get wiped out by a tidal wave. So that was and that was in the film, of course, was countered by this love between a divorced couple who offer their lives for each other, essentially. And so that whole typing sequence was done on my Macintosh CRT in the offices at Fox. We shot it, typed it. It was like hilarious.
Oh, wow. Well, so many questions. First, I want to just quickly go back because would you say that it was Terminator 2 that really, because you said it gave him more clout, Cameron, would you say up until then, even here with The Abyss, after Terminator 2, he stopped getting the studio interference, you would say?
I think that gave him a little bit of it gave them a little bit of confidence. The truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter what level of filmmaking you are, until you reach the certain level of a Spielberg or a Lucas, and of course a Cameron. You go through, it's like, oh, you did Jaws, that's great. Oh, but then you did 1941.
Right.
And so now it's like you're hit and miss. You can do great things when you have the right materials or you have the right cast and all that kind of stuff, but that's not a surefire. And so, as a filmmaker, you kind of consistently build up a body of work, and there's two different aspects of it. There's artistic respect, and then there's box office respect, and you can guess what the studio kind of emphasizes. And so Terminator did really fantastic, especially since it's a low budget film, and then Aliens was huge. of course, it was like the highest rated and or highest grossing R-rated film for the longest time, and um, those were great. But then, and so they immediately said, we'll agree to do this film, The Abyss. It sounds weird. It sounds like we're not quite sure how to sell it once we see how you're gonna do it, but we're hoping you're gonna lean more towards the horror and the action stuff. And so they put a lot of money behind it, but it they had a hard time selling it, to the point where one of the posters, I believe one of the international posters, the tagline on it literally was, "When you get there, you will understand." And they're talking about it as a double entendre, because not only as the storyline, because they don't know what the unknown is down there, and
Right.
you'll understand why, but because they they just didn't know how to advertise, how to sell the film. And everybody
Wow.
thought it was going to be a horror film, and that's why Leviathan and Deep Star Six, came out, and people saw that as, oh, so it must be a really high end horror film, underwater horror film. But that's not the case. Um,
Right.
for those who wanted a decent underwater horror film, that only came out in the past couple of years. That was a film called Underwater.
Right. With Kristen
That,
Stewart.
yes, that
Yeah.
that had some fantastic stuff in it. So
Yes.
um,
Yes.
and and so it was kind of a challenge. I don't think that it's that Jim didn't have any clout. It's one of those things where you know you can really like a great tennis player, but for playing tennis, but you don't know if they're going to be any good at baseball. So there's, and filmmakers by nature, unless they want to keep doing the same thing over and over again, they're like, you know what, I've played baseball, now I want to try playing this another sport of genres. And it'll have aspects of the things that I like, but and that people remember me for, or think of me when they hear about that. But I want to try to expand as a filmmaker. And so it was one of those things where, after The Abyss, people were thinking, okay, we know he knows how to spend money and spend it well, but if it doesn't resonate with the audiences, we're going to have to think twice about some of the stuff he's going to come up with, that he wants to do. I mean, absolutely can. Somebody's going to fund it. It's just a question of whether or not they're going to fund it for the kind of budget he wants to make it for. Because a lot of times the studios will say, yeah, you can make a personal film. We'll greenlight anything as long as it's under X amount, because we know that your name alone will get us back that box office. So, we'd love it to be a huge, huge, huge hit, but to maintain our relationship with you as a filmmaker, we will allow you to do your passion projects, even if they're going to lose money, because that'll make you feel like you can stick with us as a studio, that we will support your visions. But we're just hoping you're going to make some huge blockbusters that are four quadrant, everybody loves it, everyone wants to go see it kind of film. So after The Abyss, there was a little bit of, well, you know, what, what do we do? How do we do this? I don't think Jim had a question. He was just like, okay, I've had this idea for a sequel to Terminator, and let's do it. And matter of fact, the day I met him, he told me the story of it. The idea of, he's programmed to come back and protect John, and you know, John has this kind of adult figure that can, I believe the term was, he could order him around to go like buy beers for him because he's underage, things like that. Now that never happened in the story, but it was kind of the openness of the idea, which
Right.
made sense, and it stayed within the realm of the concept he had. So, and obviously that film did really, really well. And that was my second big project, working all the way through from stem to stern with Jim. And that was a fantastic experience as well. And so it was kind of after that, he did True Lies, which was a great kind of husband and wife kind of spy comedy, which was based on a French film called La Totale, or The Jackpot, which was a great film in and of itself, but it didn't have the scope. It had some really interesting stuff in it, though, and I urge everybody to see that film. the original as well as True Lies. If obviously everybody listening to this podcast have seen True Lies. So, and after those successes, I think for him wanting to do a historical film about Titanic, which again, even with his track record, nobody believed because oh wait, there's no aliens, there's no spaceships, there's no action per se. You're on a boat with a bunch of rich people and some poor people below. What kind of box office is going to be? Everybody called it a chick flick. Everybody thought it was going to be this this huge failure because they kept hearing reports of how expensive it was and what Jim was building down there. And obviously he's not the first and not the last filmmaker who's kind of built amazing large things to try to really immerse people in a concept, and it wasn't science fiction and it wasn't present day, and it's a period romance to some extent. So Jim, as always, defied expectations. Yeah. And made it literally the highest grossing film in the history of filmmaking for many, many years until he kind of beat that with his own Avatar.
Right.
So never count Jim out.
Right. Well, absolutely. So, but it sounds like it's always sort of been maybe a little bit of doubt just because of the scope that he aims for is really kind of what I was really interested in, what you said there. It's just, to me, it's unfathomable that anyone has ever doubted the guy, but obviously we're looking in hindsight, retrospect kind of thing. Yeah, it's wild. But going back to The Abyss, the special edition, and how you said that you had to bring back actors. Obviously it's very out there that Ed Harris, specifically, also, forgive me, Mary Elizabeth
Mastrantonio.
Both
wonderful lady.
Both did not apparently have a great time on this film. Did they come back to do the re-recording?
Ed Harris, pro that he is, even very much came back.
Wow.
Did everything. He was an amazing professional, great guy, and he and Mary Elizabeth had a huge challenge on the film because they're trying to do this, but they're trying to deal with all this technical stuff too, and that really wasn't areas that they had dealt with. Shooting underwater, wearing helmets, doing dialogue, getting pounded on in a resuscitation sequence, getting your shirt ripped off and electrode fake applied to you and everything. It's you're freezing because we're shooting in end of the year in Gaffney, South Carolina. So I can understand it was a challenge for them. And Ed's a total pro. He came back. He did things, pleasant, everything. And when we shot the interviews with him, he would talk about how challenging it was and how difficult it was. So he was a complete pro. Mary Elizabeth had actually moved on to other shows, and so she wasn't available.
Okay.
But we were able to find some of the lines from the alternate takes, the dialogue in, like I said, the video tap tapes. So we had to pull their dialogue off of 3/4-inch videotapes. It was crazy. But she was an amazing trooper as well. And I don't fault her. There's a lot of people who don't necessarily like the kind of style of kind of all-encompassing filmmaking that Jim does, and some people do and some people don't. And he's one of those guys who is good at everything. He can do everybody's job on the set better than they can, or at least as good as they can, and is not into the hierarchies as much. And he'll get down and help fix things, paint things, glue things together. And he also works on the motivation, and is that he wants to make the absolute best film and the best presentation of his story possible for the audiences to get their money's worth. And he doesn't require anything from his crew other than that they should feel exactly the same way, and that's something that's really rare, you know, and he is surrounded for the most part by people who understand that and know that he's not doing it out of the kind of control freak arrogance that a lot of directors sometimes can get known for. He's doing it because he wants to make it the best he can. I may have told you the story before, but on the Abyss, we had the deep suit, the big white suit with the liquid fluorocarbon supposedly inside the pink fluid, and Ed is having to wear this helmet, and it's filled with liquid. It's not like the kind of fake filled, wine glass thing you see, the party trick thing, where
Right.
it's like two panes of glass and a bit of water inside. No, because you see it touching his face. You see bubbles on his face because it was literally kind of a fishbowl that they put on him and close it up, and it has to be sealed so that the water doesn't leak out, because that's not what the suit does. And he had to act like he was choking while not actually choking, and he had to open his mouth to look like he was breathing, in this pink water. And then at the end of a take, he had to learn to hold his breath long enough so that he could do a minute of acting where he's putting this thing on and then thrash around and then calm down and then go with this liquid in his mouth. And then when they said cut, it was pull the things off, pour the water out, take the thing off of him so he could actually breathe. So that's the kind of commitment we were talking about. And it's
Right.
not that Ed is not up for it, I think. It's just that sometimes it can get to be a lot.
Right. Right. Because
But
it kind of goes beyond acting. Really at that point, it's really not acting anymore.
yeah,
Ultimately, it's
well, some people do that. Some people like to do that. Some people like to pretend to do that. Some people, and when I say pretend to do it, pretend like they're in trouble
right.
for the scene, but know that they're confident enough. I mean, he had to learn all the diving and all the kind of stuff. So did everybody on the cast and half the crew as well. So it was a huge commitment, and it was a lot of challenge. And like on a lot of his films, there's going to be some doubters on the studio side who are like, well, do we really need this scene? And the budget's getting really high. Can we change this? Can we do this? Can we cut this? I remember one of the biggest challenges on the Abyss while we were going through the summer doing all our prep. We built deep core in the exterior deep core set in this big nuclear reactor containment tank that was 300 feet in diameter and 60 feet deep. And the costs of building all this stuff, because nobody had ever done it before, and it was a huge challenge, and getting the water clear enough and keeping this big nuclear reactor containment vessel, which was not built as a watertight tank, and turning it into a watertight tank and having it leak and have all these different things. And there were the studio folks who were coming down saying, I see it. It looks wonderful, looks amazing, but it's costing us so much. Is it really going to be something we're going to be able to do? Can you figure out what you can cut so that we can do? Well, you need to have the habitat, to be able to go through it. You need to have the exterior to do these things. You need to do this. We're already doing miniatures for so many things. We've got um, full size submersibles. 3 of them on camera that we're trying to show, and all this stuff. And one of the things that happened was uh, one of the studio execs came down and said, "You know what? I'm gonna suggest, nay, kind of order that you cut the opening scene with the sinking of the Montana, because it's not our main characters. We can just start with the helicopter landing and say a sub has sunk." So we just lose that opening sequence, then you can, we'll save X amount of money and like half a week of shooting for the flooding and everything of the control room. It's like, yeah, but then you don't understand you don't set up the whole mysterious light that causes its power to go out, and all of these things. And it was something that people could understand, because you have um, this idea of going in a submarine and having crush depths and having all these things. That was one of the things I did, was research a lot of the cases, military submarines that have kind of gone awry. And so they wanted to cut that whole thing. And we were like, no way, this is the action sequence that's going to pull people into the film. You talk about something, you show it. That's what film's about. You show it, you don't just talk about it, if you can do it. Plus, we were going to have to build the command center set anyway for the flooded sequences later, so it didn't save us any money. So that was one of the things. And you have to, as a filmmaker, I think, really stay steadfast in what you try to do, and you work with them. You kind of say, well, yeah, I can lose this, I can combine this and this, and that can help, but there are certain things that you do with your gut and stuff, and try to make it worthwhile. And so I think it's been my experience that's how he operates, and you see that at every level. And he'll look at not necessarily the cheapest way to do it or the most expensive way. He's going to find the best way for his storytelling, and that's what makes him the kind of filmmaker he is.
Right. Yeah. Having not seen the theatrical cut personally, I've only seen the special edition. Would you say that is the preferred definitive? That's why that was re-released in December, not the theatrical. That's the one that he wants everybody to see.
I think so, because that was his original vision. And the fact that the theatrical version didn't do as well, one could argue, is that because it didn't really, it kind of too quickly wrapped up the whole issue. Now, you can find the theatrical version. It's on the DVD that I did. That was one of the other things in the interim, in around 2000, 1999 to 2000. I was asked by Fox, having worked on the show and everything, and to produce a DVD of The Abyss. And I had worked on the special edition back in '91, and I had worked on the theatrical. And I was becoming kind of an expert on DVD kind of special edition stuff. So they asked me to work on including the DVD menus and everything. I would suggest anybody who's interested, if they really want to kind of see what it was like at that time, to get find on eBay or on Amazon. It's still available, the Abyss Special Edition DVD from 1999. That is is that a Blu-ray, or is that
This is a DVD. Yeah.
Yeah. And does it say it has both the theatrical version and the special edition version?
It does. Yep.
Yeah, because we were one of the first DVDs, and this was one of my specialties back then, to create seamless branched versions of the movie, so you could choose which one you wanted to watch, and it would run just like it would in the theater without any breaks. That was the great breakthrough in DVDs over Laserdisc, which we were all fans of. And I was able to update all of my materials for the making of The Abyss and stuff. I don't know if this has all my supplemental material on the second disc, but if it does, you'll have seen all the extra stuff, from a firsthand account of how everything was achieved.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if this wasn't the one, I was going to quickly run over, because that's one of my things, is I collect every edition, every international edition. That's like one of my things. Is all of Cameron's films. I have Laserdisc, VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, 4K. I have it all. So I probably have The Abyss, I don't know, 10, 15 times at this point.
Well, when we did do you have both editions of the Laserdisc? Because sorry, there's technically three versions. The one was the original, just the movie, back in probably 89, 90. which was just kind of a standard. You make a laser disc of a transfer of the film, and then when we did the special edition version, the full film version, finished on film in 91, 92, 92, we did two things. One, we released it to the theaters. We released the special edition on film to the theaters, two theaters, one in New York and one in Los Angeles, for 1 week, maybe 2 weeks. So it did get a theatrical release, but it kind of went under the radar because it was only in two theaters. So,
Right.
but then we did the special edition Laserdiscs, and there's two incarnations of that. One was the kind of standard letterbox, which was only starting to really get out there. Everything prior to that was pan and scan, because the studios were tired of consumers going, "What are these black bars? Why aren't I getting a full picture?" And unlike every other filmmaker, Jim said, "You know what? I understand why they're doing pan and scan, and let's not look at it just as we're losing parts of the movie. Let's take a look at it as, what if there are any positives to it?" And so we consciously did a pan and scan version of the film, in addition to the letterbox version of the film for Laserdisc. And this is all standard def, mind you. So,
Right.
but Jim said we should release both versions out there and let's see. And so we did two Laserdisc versions. One was pan and scan, and one was letterboxed. And Jim included a letter in the pan and scan version explaining why he, stopped hating pan and scan and learned to understand it. So he wrote a whole letter to the consumer on, why why he did this, when other filmmakers were like, "I only wanted my original version, widescreen. So you're going to look at black boxes." And his argument was basically that you treat them as two different mediums, because of the format. Because it's not just about format. It's about the fact that when you do letterbox, you are seeing the whole picture, the whole wide picture as designed by the filmmaker. But because it's on a 4:3 television, the image has to be shrunk to fit it, right? So you get the black bars, and so you keep the scope, but you lose the intimacy because all the imagery is smaller. And when the imagery is smaller, then you can't see the expressions completely on the faces. You can't see, those little nuances, the intimacy of, like, in a scene that's not about the big vista. It's about your characters and their expressions, their arguments, and their relationship, where you can kind of push in on that a little more and focus on those and see them more clearly, in low res, high definition, standard definition, in the pan and scan version. And so he espoused that pan and scan was a legitimate format if it is done by the filmmaker, and it isn't just somebody transferring it saying, "Oh, okay, I'm missing this, so I have to do this, and I have to actually cut in the middle of a shot." The famous shot of that was from Raiders of the Lost Ark, near the beginning, when Indy's in the temple of the Chachapoyan warriors, and he triggers the fence with the spikes in it that shoot across.
Right.
And if you remember, Spielberg framed it so that Indy was on one side and he raises his hand into the light on the other side. And because he framed it this way, there's no way to fit that in a pan and scan. So they had to cut to just him and then cut to his hand. So they took a shot that was one shot and split it into two in one of the transfers. So that kind of can be problematic, or it can be useful. But if it's done with the filmmaker saying, "Okay, I've got to fit it into this format," it's kind of like fitting it into a time slot. You got to cut a few things out to be able to fit in a particular time slot because of commercials, because of whatever. then it's better, if you're going to have to do it, have the filmmaker involved. There are a lot of filmmakers who said, I don't want to be involved. And then they're all kind of understandably angry when they see how it was done, because they want to hold the line of, this is my work. It doesn't get changed without my say so. And if it does, I can claim it had nothing to do with my input, and delegitimize it to some extent. Um, Jim took a wider view than that, which was really interesting. He said, "How do I take advantage of all these things? If I'm," and that's part of his whole process. What are my limitations? How do I overcome them, or how do I adapt to them? And he's done that with the filmmaking process, the film marketing process, the everything. And that's one of the reasons why I think he's, head and shoulders above a lot of other folks who focus on these things. And nothing wrong with that, but he tries to look at the broader picture.
Do
So,
you fast forwarding to now, do you agree with
mhm.
what he's doing with it really started with Terminator 2 when that was re-released, what, 2017 I think, is, because that would have been 2016, somewhere in there was the 25-year anniversary. So he basically took the whole picture and uh did DNR on there, digital noise reduction, like basically cleaned up the entire thing so that it got rid of the grain, it got rid of all this stuff, and a lot of people um
Had a problem with that. Yeah.
yeah, have a problem
It's
with
a
that.
it's a challenge because sometimes it's an aesthetic choice. Sometimes it's trying to fix things that could have been done right, but for whatever circumstance, something was overexposed, something, showed up. Um, I noticed that one of the main things that disappeared from that version was bits where the crew showed up in
Right.
the shots,
Yeah,
outside the hospital escape. There's this shot that whips around with the car, and you could see the entire crew standing off the side. I looked at the recent version. I was like, oh, yep, they painted it out.
it's gone.
Uh, so there are a number of things, and that's why it's really interesting to go back and actually, like you said, if you buy every copy of every different versions, you can see the iterations and how they change. Remember back on Aliens, when I was working on, I didn't work on the special edition of Aliens until the second iteration of it. And there were people complaining about, oh, the transfer, they took all the grain out, and all this kind of stuff. Or they complained that he left all the grain in, it looks really grainy and it looks low res. So you have to decide as a filmmaker what serves your story. Sometimes things look better grainy, sometimes they give a grittiness to it, they give a reality to it. Other times it looks like it's been painted over. So we've heard those arguments for like every film for a
Right.
long, long time. People talk about the Star Wars films the same way. They did all this cleanup and then they went beyond cleanup. Because it's one thing to take out dirt and negative dirt, which shows up as white squiggles, and spots and everything. And believe me, in the visual effects world, one of the first things we did when it came to doing digital was we had to scan the film frames. This is true back as far, as late as Titanic. We had to scan film to get it into the computer. And then we had to work on the shot. And that the first step of working on the shot was almost always go in there and paint out every speck of dirt and everything out of the shot so that there was nothing to mess up. You don't mess with the grain per se. You're not supposed to, because then you'd have to do everything. But you paint out all the dirt, and it literally is going into Photoshop frame by frame and cloning bits and moving things around and so on. And then when you finish doing the shot, the composite, whatever it needs to be, you then have to take those digital files and send a whole set of frames of 2K files to a scanning output house that would then film them back out onto film, and then that's what gets cut into the negative. It was a very, very kind of belabored process, but it gave you the ability to work with the digital tools and get it looking exactly right and balance things exactly right. Because when you're doing it with optical, it's sometimes challenging. This one element is overexposed slightly. You have to figure out how to bring that down while not, underexposing the rest of the stuff. And the digital thing made it so much easier. So,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, a- and it's a taste. It's a matter of taste. If you grew up watching certain types of things where everything was squeaky clean, then you look back at an older film and you may go, well, it looks so grainy. I wish they could have, gone through with a pass of it and clean it up. Other people say, no, no, no. That's what makes film film. It's a photochemical process, and it can look a lot better than that, and it doesn't get the disparity of cutting from a clean daylight shot to a really grainy nighttime shot, that it doesn't pull you out of the film that way. So you can understand different people have different opinions. All the same with the pan and scan layer box debate.
Right.
Everybody has a different way of viewing things through their eyes. And so there are different camps, and all of them can be right. And that's why I'm of the opinion that we should never necessarily get to a point where it's like, okay, destroy all the previous versions of it. This is the only one that exists. Because when you go back and look at some of these others, you might be able to see things and feel things and understand things differently. So that's kind of the way I look at it.
Yeah,
It's
and
like
I
it's like the difference between looking at somebody's picture in real life versus what they post,
yes,
you
that's a
know.
great analogy.
Because it's very easy to say, oh, well, I want to get rid of this blemish here. Then maybe if I can do that, I can get rid of this wrinkle here, and then I can do this, and pretty soon they don't look anything like who they really are.
Right.
And maybe that's the way they want it, because there's a lot of people like that too. But if you're trying to do kind of, honest filmmaking, you want to see people for who they really are, because then you're really in touch with them, as opposed to looking at kind of a cartoon version of them,
Right.
their ideal cartoon version.
Right.
So
And I
sorry,
think
didn't mean
that
to
was
interrupt.
no, you're good. I think that was one of the criticisms of T2. I don't think because it was a 4K master on The Abyss, and I didn't notice. Again, maybe it's because I'm not super familiar with The Abyss compared to T2. I've seen that way more, but The Abyss looked great. And I don't know if between T2 and The Abyss, something was figured out there to get that perfect balance. But in T2, there was, like how you said, cartoony. Like some of the characters, Arnold, Linda, they all had this waxy kind of look to them that
Well,
really turned
here's
people off.
here's the thing. Jim has movies to make and projects that he's working on, and dives to the Marianas Trench to do. So you know, there are certain films he has complete control over, and others like T2, because it was a big hit. It also was owned by Studio Canal, Caraco, and these other folks, that they would have transfers and say, well, did Jim do this transfer for the color? Yes, he did. Okay, well, we notice there's some dirt and stuff on it. We're just going to go through and do a cleanup on it. And a lot of times when they do a cleanup on it, they're not doing it the way we did in the visual effects days, which is we would go in and frame by frame paint it, because they're trying to do the whole movie. It's not just one effect shot. They're trying to paint, the dirt out of all of it. And the way they did it was they automated it, which involves blurring the image and then resharpening the image using video tools. And when you do that, you definitely get rid of the dirt, but you also end up getting that exact look you're talking about. And the argument I think a lot of these releases and the studios doing these releases did was they would say, it's Jim's transfer. So all we did was we sent it through noise cancellation or do this kind of little thing. And so they, in their minds, it's the same exact film. For Jim and the fans who care about that kind of thing, they'll look at it and go, yeah, that's not quite, what it looks like, what we shot and what we looked like. And if it's on a format that can support it, I mean, VHS, it doesn't matter on VHS because it's so smeary anyway. But as the formats got better and we went through DVD and then to Blu-ray and then to UHD and so on, it became more and more noticeable.
Mhm.
I mean, the higher resolution formats for all of these things, video in particular, have caused massive shifts in artistic processes because of it. the whole makeup uh, area of filmmaking had to change how they did makeup, because now the quality was so high definition that you couldn't get away with some of the kind of quick tricks that you would do in the old days to make makeup look smooth and do those things. And and now they have digital makeup processes, some of them automated. And you see people taking advantage of all those in really creative ways, but there's also people who are like, yeah, just blur me a little so I don't, so I don't have as many pores showing. But
Right.
the make digital makeup stuff is phenomenal. You look at this stuff that they do for all the de-aging and the old aging of people. When it's done well, it is really fantastic. You know, I mean, they couldn't have done, say, Captain America: First Avenger, making Skinny Steve without those things. They did the same thing, and you reach kind of a height with Captain Marvel. Where they de-aged Samuel L. Jackson for the entire movie. So all the processes keep changing, and that means that the creative bar keeps changing, and the creative acceptance keeps changing. The purists want the closest to the original energy of the film as it was made, versus this process that's so down the line. So
Right.
that's why I think indies will never go away. They have that rawness, and they have sometimes, you know, people put in mistakes in camera moves. They put a bobble or they put a shake in, and whereas in the old days, you couldn't help it. You were rolling a dolly and it was doing this. You know, all those great push-ins on all the dolly moves on the great musicals. They're not perfectly smooth because they're done by people, and
Right.
it feels that, and it feels right. It feels real. Now we can do powers of 10 moves through ridiculous things, and sometimes it feels fake
Mhm.
because it's like there's no way you can do that. And we've just come to the point where now we just assume everything is digital, or everything has been passed through these kind of filters. And I feel that's a little bit sad because um, you're trying to get human performances and human empathy through that. And that's why I think Jim has been working so hard on his mocap stuff and making it so not only can it look real, but it feels real in the motions and the little tweaks, the little nuances of things. That's what makes them affecting, as opposed to them being cartoon characters.
Mhm. Yeah, it's true. Um, so when you think of The Abyss, to because and I loved it,
Yeah.
and I absolutely love that we did it because I'm a geek about home media stuff as well. So I love that we went down there. But bringing it back to The Abyss and the 4K
Hmm.
and it, kind of being back in, uh, everyone's minds thanks to that re-release. Do you think it holds up? And what is one of the things, having seen it recently within like the
Hmm.
last, 7 months, what is the one thing that when you watched it, you're like, you know, pat yourself on the back, still incredibly proud of?
Well, I just think that the fact that it works and it holds its spell through the whole film, and I'm so gratified that it's kind of being reassessed, like a lot of films that kind of came out and were dismissed because they weren't what was either understood or enjoyed at the time, based on expectations, based on marketing or mismarketing. Um, I'm so glad that it's being reevaluated, you know, as something that is certainly, not the failure that I think a lot of people thought it was, and the fact that it costs so much. Um, because there's this kind of logarithmic curve of budgets. You know, there's actually a really funny there's a really funny interview I think Jim did with Letterman, maybe back in after True Lies, where he talked about how you know Terminator cost this much. It was like, I'm not trying to remember if it was 8 million or something like that, and then Aliens cost like 20 million, and then The Abyss cost 40 million, and Terminator 2 cost like 100 million, and then uh, True Lies cost maybe 120, and they were saying, well, so he said, by that calculation, my next film should cost like 200 million, and the host asked, well, do you really think anybody's going to spend that much money on a movie? And Jim said, no, I don't think so. And then boom, Titanic,
Yep.
you know. But Jim has this unique ability to spend a ridiculous amount of money and yet still make back a multiple that is unheard of in the business. And he's still, I think, the only guy who's done that. And kudos to him for that, because it's not about just making it bigger. It's about making it as effective every time. So can't, you know, you can't fault success, I guess.
Right. But you do think it holds up still?
I do think it holds up because, again, it's less about the special effects, even though the special effects are really good, especially for its time. One of the first kind of CG realistic things, because prior to that, it was, you know, Willow, the stained glass man in Young Sherlock Holmes, and here's something that has to be not in a fantasy film, that has to be in a film that you believe, you know, takes place. And even, you know, doing aliens with puppets and things on the set is physically there, so you kind of go with it. Whereas when you're doing the pseudopod, it was something that nobody had ever seen before, but you had to understand, you had to know exactly how it would look, because it's water. So that was one of the big challenges there, and I think it still holds up. I mean, we do it with probably a little bit more wave calculation and stuff on the surfaces and stuff nowadays, but I remember that trying to design that sequence, storyboarding out every single shot, because you have to do that and figure out how you're going to do this, and then making a cut of it. We would cut storyboards together on video for the length of each cut, you know, record temp dialogue and you know, and just put it together so we knew, okay, this is how the sequence we want to play, how slow or how fast it moves from shot to shot. This is what we want for the sequence. Then you'd send that up to ILM, who we hired to do that sequence, and they would go through and calculate, okay, this shot, let's break it down, shot A, B, C, D, and so on. Figure out how long the cut is. You need to have a couple frames handle on either side, so that if you need to shift things a little bit, you have the extra film. So they would calculate it out, and how long it would take, you know, how many frames it is going to be total for that sequence as it is designed. And then they would go back and say, okay, we need to figure out how long it takes to render this. And this is back in the days when the highest end computers were less powerful than today's cell phones. So, and their biggest storage was like I want to say 9 gigabytes or something. That was like huge. And they had to calculate out. I remember we were in the middle of shooting when ILM came back and said, yeah, we just figured out that if we started rendering today, which we're not ready yet because we don't have all the scenes, we don't have the cut scenes, we don't have, you know, all the CG worked out yet. We've got promising tests and everything. If we started rendering today, we would not get all of the shots for the sequence done until after the film's release date. So it suddenly became, okay, well, we're going to need to fix that. And the way we did it was we cut about a third of the CG shots out of the in running time, out of the pseudopod sequence by, I believe it was Jim and Dennis Murin of ILM who came up with the idea of, why don't we do the whole first part of it as the pseudopod POV. So you notice we don't actually see the pseudopod for a good long period. You see part of it's like a hump rise in the water a little bit, but after that, it was a POV that goes down this long hallway and goes through a door and everything, and you don't see it until the big reveal when Lindsay wakes up and sees it.
Right.
And that gave us like 30 seconds plus worth of non-CG rendering, because Dennis came up with a way to do this watery look using opticals, film opticals in a lab. And it was brilliant. It involved making concentric overlapping rings of the image that are dissolved together, but each ring is one frame out of sync with the next one.
Wow.
And because it's handheld, it floats in the middle because it's been moving forward the whole shot. That's how they created that watery look. It was brilliant, and it saved us the release date, and it probably saved a fair amount of money. So those are the kind of things that you're. Yeah,
they went the Jaws route.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you had to find some way to do it so that and again, because it served the story, it kept the mystery.
Right.
Same with Bruce and the shark's not working, so let's just show barrels and play the music, and it works great. And so I think that the effects hold up pretty well. There's a few shots that are less successful than others. We have miniatures in that film, both underwater miniatures, surface miniatures on the actual ocean, which is always tougher because you can't scale the ocean. The water waves are a certain size, so you have to make your models 40 feet long. The benthic Explorer being one of those, and you have to shoot it at high speed so that it's slower and everything. And we shot underwater miniatures that were 4 foot long submersibles that were radio controlled. A guy named Walt Conti and his production company, Walt Conti Productions, built those and operated those. And they had all the motors just like on the big ones, just much smaller. But they were big. They had to have puppets inside. They had to be water sealed. They had to be neutrally buoyant with all the motors and batteries inside them and everything. And those were hold up really well because they're real, craft moving in water. And then we had to do motion control ones that were 1/8 scale because we needed to have those shots of the submersibles gliding over the wreck of the Montana. And the Montana was like a 65-foot model in its broken on the ledge state. And it was done by DreamQuest. That was Hoyt Yateman's company. And they were out in Simi Valley, and they had a huge stage that they had a motion control system rigged up. They have to create the sense of it being underwater by shooting in smoke. So because the fall off of light and the way things work, that's how you can do fake underwater. You shoot it in smoke, but the smoke can't just be roiling smoke. It has to be even haze, which means you have fans that are automated to keep everything in a stirred up state, but not swirling around. And you have to light for that because that's where you get the light shafts and things like that. And you have to suspend models on rigs, and they have to have lights on them. And you're not shooting in real time. You're shooting one frame at a time. And oftentimes one set of lights at a time because they need different exposure levels. So you would end up putting 6 pieces of film together, 10 pieces of film together just to shoot a shot of these submersibles, even though all 3 submersibles would be in the shot over the model. They would have to be programmed to be perfectly moving one frame at a time and not swing or anything else. And if somebody accidentally opened the door to the room and it changed the light levels or it changed the smoke levels, you got to start over for that take.
Wow.
So it's a very, very meticulous process. So I think they did a pretty darn good job. And to me, the best compliment that I heard was during the Academy Visual Effects Bake Off, in which you cut together a reel and you run it for all the members of the visual effects branch. And they watch it and they hear people talk about it and ask questions about it. And then they vote on which films should be the nominees for visual effects. I remember some really famous visual effects gurus from like all the way through the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s who watched it. I remember them as they were walking out of the room after the screening of all these films, saying, "I don't know why the Abyss is there. They just shot a bunch of submersibles. They just shot a bunch of submarines. What's the special effects in that?"
Wow.
So that told me that, we accomplished what we were trying to accomplish. Because if they couldn't tell, and they couldn't tell that it was 4 or 5 different methods, then we really and that's a tribute to the editing as well. Cutting it in intercutting them in such a way that you couldn't tell which was a model necessarily and which was the full size, because there were full size with the actors in them, in the shoot as well. So, I mean, that's one of the things Jim is really good at. You know, he creates enough verisimilitude that you then push it over the top with the miniatures and stuff. And if you've done it well, people won't know what is what.
Yeah. Yep. That is
So
that.
so I do think it holds up. And it's different than the kind of stories sometimes people expect from him. Less so now, because he's kind of carried the idea of, you can do kind of a big epic scope and story while still being intimately involved with these characters, as he's done with the Avatar films and so on. So I think that, he's kind of leaned into the process, and it wasn't, well, how do I get away with this? It's, how do I get it so that what my actors do comes through the technology while still having the benefits of what the technology can offer us. I mean, the fact that he was able to have an actress in her, 60s, Sigourney Weaver, playing a character who's in her teens as a Na'vi, and then even prior to that, as her character in the first Avatar, is really interesting. Because what that does is that gives a second life, a second phase of a career for actors who, quote unquote, age out of the kind of roles they want to play. Now they don't have to age out if they're still young at heart, and they can do these kind of things. And that wasn't about, which was the biggest fear, everybody's going to get replaced by CG. Jim is actively fighting to get it so that actors have a tool in CG that can prolong their ability to serve, and perform the kind of things they want to do. So I think that's what it means, is that he's often known as this technocentric guy. And he's really talented in that area, but it's all for trying to reach the human connection and maintain the human connection that you don't often see retained in, just doing a bunch of massive scope explosions, space, shots and things. So he's one of those filmmakers who's so technically proficient that he's smarter than everybody else in the room, but he's also fighting for that human element in a way that a lot of people kind of get lost in it because the technology is so cool.
Yeah.
That's been my experience.
I agree. And just to keep this at a digestible kind of runtime here, we're at 1:15. We're at 1:15, and I look, I could and assuming you would like to come back, I want to hear more and more stories, and we'll talk about other films and we'll work these back in. But
Yeah.
The Abyss is, like I said, and maybe people listening or watching the podcast agree that it's one of those films that you didn't know you needed, kind of thing, when it comes to Cameron. I didn't know I needed it until I saw it in December. And then I was like, okay, I don't know why it took me this long. It is one of the best underwater films I think I've ever seen. I haven't seen every single one of them, but I think it really set the standard. And kudos.
Well, yeah. One of the things he did was, he said, I've watched every other underwater film, from For Your Eyes Only to, any other films that had folks underwater, and it was always second unit with divers. and at most they dubbed in voices, but you never saw their faces. Or they do a close up of they shot them with in a like a swimming pool just for a tight close up. He wanted to do it like a real movie where you would shoot coverage, you would shoot the actors, you would see that it was the actors. He would do these shots where you see characters start wide, so you see this whole underwater set. You can tell it's underwater because there's actually bubbles coming out,
Right.
and they're walking up into camera, right into a close up, so you can see that it's them. You know, we redesigned helmets so that lights could be turned inward so you could see the faces. He set so many precedences on The Abyss for filmmaking reasons that it was really phenomenal. Um, all to tell a story and to make you care about these characters. So it isn't like in a lot of the old movies, you know, not to bag on like a Bond movie, but where they would have, okay, he puts on a wetsuit, he's on a ship, and you see a wide shot, somebody in the wetsuit wearing a mask, you can't tell, dives off, and then all the action that happens was with stunt divers and everything else.
Right.
And then he comes up out of the water, and you lift it up, and you see that it's the actor, and it's he wanted to do it so that you really felt you were there, and that these characters were there, because he wasn't trying to do the realism of it's not about making the aliens look real, the NTIs. It was about selling the idea of these roughnecks who worked on an undersea oil rig, and it was exactly the same kind of things you see in real oil rigs. You know, there's this mundanity, there's this kind of, you know, trucker fix it however you need to fix it mentality, and this jovial camaraderie. And that's one of the things he captured really well. And I think you can really see that now, because you're not distracted by, oh wow, I've never seen a set like this, or oh, I've never seen effects like this, I've never seen this kind of thing. Now you can, I think, really appreciate the performances of all the actors, because we now see that in a lot of other things. You know,
Yeah.
Ridley Scott kind of did the same with Alien. You know, it was space truckers, you know, and Jim knows that world because he was a trucker before he was before he became a filmmaker. So he understands that. He knows other people will understand that. The general public will understand that, and it'll instantly kind of bond the audience with the characters.
Right.
So
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I do want to ask, because that first episode I had you on the Titanic Roundtable, your background was
mhm,
a fake background, I believe, right? You had a fake background behind you
probably,
to kind of hide where you were. This looks like a real background, unless
yeah.
it's okay. It is
No,
real.
it's a real background. It's a real background.
What's behind you?
That is a plan view of deep core.
Okay.
So if you can see, there's cab 3, there is flatbed
Okay.
over here. This is the rig command module up at the top. Those are the 2 thrusters at the top. This is how that thing, how that oil rig, undersea oil rig looks. So that's a real thing. That's actually one of the MIRVs from the Montana.
Get
Uh,
out of here.
so they had a lot of fiberglass props that they were throwing away. So
You
I
kept it.
figured, why not? So yeah, and this artwork, it's a photocopy, of course, was done and designed by Ron Cobb, the wonderful artist Ron Cobb, who also worked on Alien and worked on Star Wars and all these great things. Wonderful, wonderful guy. People should go look up his books, Color Vision, and some of these others, and you'll recognize so many things that he has designed. Amazing, amazing artist.
And then
Ron
this looks
Cobb, Cobb.
and then this
That
looks
over
like
there,
Independence Day.
that's Independence Day. Now, I didn't work on that film per se. I did do the uh, special edition DVD for that film, and this was actually a gift from the pyrotechnic effects uh, uh, guy on the show named Joe Viscosal, who is the guy who created all of those zero G explosions for Star Wars.
Wow.
And because I helped him on his show reel, you know, back 20 years ago maybe, So he gave me a framed signed picture from this sequence, which is, you know, his one of his most signature sequences, apart from Star Wars and everything. And uh, he won the Academy Award for this movie. One of the four visual effects artists supervisors who won, and he also worked with us on The Abyss and on Terminator 2, among other things, and Terminator 1. He did the tanker truck explosion in
Oh,
the
that's
first
cool.
Terminator film. So yeah, so I kind of keep his memory alive. He passed away a few years ago, and so I proudly have that. So that's
Wow.
what that is.
Well, look, I would love to have you back on for a third time down the road. I know we would like to. I'm planning on the T2 3D talk with Adam.
Hmm.
I would love to get you on for that. It would just be us
Sure.
three. But look, I love your passion. I love how in depth you get. You deep dive, pun totally intended, on all this stuff, and that's what the podcast is. It's a celebration of Cameron's work and everybody that makes it happen. Because it's not just Cameron; it's people like you and talent like you that made the Abyss what it is today. So
Well, to be fair, I learned this level of detail and this level of passion from Jim. So, this is kind of part of my, way of kind of paying it forward and hopefully inspire other people. Certainly not quite in the way he has, but to be able to say, you know what, this stuff you can learn so much from it. Not just about filmmaking, but if you really have a passion for it, learn about underwater rigs, how they work, the science of it, the exploration of it, all those things. I had some of that of my own before I met Jim, but then I think that's one of the reasons why he hired me to be his researcher at first, and then kind of moved up to being head of his production department at Lightstorm after 8 years. And that's been taken over by uh, my assistant at the time, Jeff Burdick, who you should definitely talk to as well, as he's been carrying that on and becoming, that for Jim ever since. And he's a great guy as well.
and what was
So
his name again?
Jeff Burdick.
Jeff Burdick. Okay.
Yeah.
Noted. Noted.
So
Now, really, truly, before we wrap up this episode, one last
yeah.
thing. If you
Hmm.
remember on the Titanic roundtable at the end, I asked everyone what their favorite Cameron film was, and I believe you were unable to pick a definitive answer. In the time,
I am still unable to,
okay,
because they all, I was involved with a lot of them in one way or another, even if some of them fully on production, some of them tangentially on production and in post, some of them just because I watched them to death, and
yeah,
sometimes because I was able to go back and get involved with, the the props and some of the things that had been, needed to be prepared for a museum or other things. So it's kind of hard. I really enjoy all of them. So
gotcha. All right. Well, yeah. Well, I was gonna say in the time between that and now, did you pick one? But maybe on that third
sorry.
one, maybe on that third episode. We'll get to it.
Well,
But thank you for coming back on, Van. Seriously,
sure
this is
thing. Sure thing.
I love
Look
talking
forward
to
to
you.
doing more.
Honestly, I love to just listen to you. I don't know that there was a whole lot of talking. I love just listening to you because you have a plethora of stories. So definitely going to have you back on. Everybody, thank you for watching and listening. And as I like to say, go watch a Cameron film.